This is the Welcome to Humanity podcast with thought leader and transformative psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Moss. This show focuses on the betterment of humanity on a global scale. Each episode will leave you enlightened, inspired, and ready to make an impact in your world. Welcome to the show. Welcome to your life. Welcome to humanity. Here's Dr. Fred.
Welcome to another unbelievable episode of the Welcome to Humanity podcast. As some of you know, though, those of you who frequently listen to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, sometimes I get the fortune of actually meeting somebody on my podcast that I know or knew very little about, or someone else introduces me, someone else says that I need to talk to this person or they need to speak with me. And then this is just a kind of occurs, and then off we are and off we're running. And today is no different. So, gosh, Casey, I think we met less than 48 hours ago. And although I think my name has circulated in front of you and your name in front of me, the idea that we needed to talk to each other didn't become clear to either or both of us until really approximately 48 or 72 hours ago. So what a cool opportunity to be able to do this inside podcast world, inside the idea that we get to share this conversation with others who are doing nothing less than just listening to us right now and someday in the future talking about whatever we're going to talk about today. So welcome to the Welcome to Humanity podcast. It is indeed an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to introduce myself to you and then introduce you to our listeners. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fred. I am very grateful for this opportunity to make a difference and to speak into the listening of your listeners.
Awesome. Well, if you had the opportunity to listen to any of our previous episodes, sometimes when I'm just meeting someone, I ask what I call the 9-letter question. And the 9-letter question is a large question, fully grammatically correct and complete, that has a total of 9 letters in it. And those 9 letters spell out 3 words, and those words are, who are you? So really, who are you?
My name is Casey Hardison. I am a carbon-based bipedal life form who is committed to the possibility of passion, love, light, and unity for all people.
All right. This idea of being, a carbon-based bipedal life form, how does that separate you from the other 7.8 billion of us?
It doesn't at all.
Oh.
There's zero separation.
Okay, so we're all carbon-based bipedal life forms of some nature.
For those that still have their feet.
That's right. They've got to have feet to make that happen.
Yes, we all are carbon-based life forms, coded in the same genetics, including the trees and the flowers and the birds and the bees.
Now, of course, the trees and flowers and birds and bees, they would have an argument about the number of petals that they have.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Each and every one of us is really dealing with something, right? No matter whether we're tackling some of the big problems in the world or maybe even the tiny ones, we all face challenges. Now, I've been a psychiatrist for many years, and I've worked with all kinds of people from all walks of life. I've worked with more people than I can really count, from various backgrounds, dealing with more issues than you can imagine, of all sizes and shapes. So naturally, over time, I've developed a number of ways to assist others in gaining a new sense of freedom and empowerment. Now, I'm pulling back the curtain on one of those methodologies, and I'm going public, revealing the process and associated mindset that contributed to using this particular method with maximum effectiveness. It's all laid out in my new book called Creative 8, Healing Through Creativity and Self-Expression. You can pick this book up on Amazon.com in either Kindle or paperback format. And as a listener to the Welcome to Humanity podcast, I'd like to offer you a completely free copy in audiobook format. Just go to welcometohumanity.net/creative and download your free audiobook copy of Creative 8 today. I really look forward to hearing about your Creative 8 breakthrough. Now, let's get back to this amazing conversation.
Welcome to humanity. This idea of being committed to making a huge difference, or to be here to actually, some people say to leave this place better off than when you came, or to actually move the needle forward, to actually push a conversation into a progressive direction. Tell us a little bit about who you are and where, to this point in your life, where have you found some pedal holds or footholds to actually begin to make that kind of difference?
I have an unconventional upbringing. I grew up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. My father got sober in 1974, and I literally grew up through the smoke line, I like to say, as he recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind, and my family recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind that we were all in. So having grown up in Ala-tot, Ala-teen, Al-Anon, adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, 12 steps and 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, things like Healing the Shame That Binds You by John Bradshaw, workshops on inner child, grief, anger therapy, 8 years of sobriety myself and Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, I discovered LSD. And it transformed my life. I had that promised spiritual awakening of the 12 steps, and I had a rapid integration that impressed upon me the urgency of stewarding and caring for Mother Earth in all her relations.
You kind of use the word LSD just like in passing, like somebody might say potatoes. And I want to make sure that our listeners really understand that when you say the word LSD, you're actually talking about lysergic acid diethylamide. And I really want to say a little bit more. We're looking at a man who grew up behind those doors, who grew up with a father who had some issues that had him at least self-labeled as an alcoholic or as someone who is dependent on drugs and or alcohol. And then, Al-Anon, Alateen, all the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, Bradshaw's work, and all the work that you had. And then 8 years sobriety. I guess one question I have, knowing a little bit about how the way that fellowship works, is on the day that you ingested LSD, was that a breach of your sobriety?
Absolutely, 100%. So I'd had this experience a few weeks before in an All Hallows Eve ritual in my house in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Coeur d'Alene, I know Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Is that where you live right now?
My family's got had a ranch near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Post Falls.
I was just
less
than 2 years ago.
I'm not there at the moment. This All Hallows Eve ritual had a spiced wine component, and I asked that my partner boil that effectively to remove the alcohol. And then as I was going through this ritual, which was really about death and dying and obviously the eventual rebirth of plants in the spring, I realized that self-identifying, possibly even a medicalized identity of alcoholic, once an addict, always an addict of NA, that conceptualization was like a flat line of a heart rate monitor. That was death. That wasn't transformation. That was an essence, a box I had stuck myself in. And in the middle of that ritual, which I did not consume any alcohol because it was all boiled out of there effectively. But in the middle of that ritual, I decided, which quite interestingly, that was the 8th anniversary of getting sober.
On that day?
That very day.
You got your coin that day.
Well, I didn't go to a meeting. November 1st of 1985, I got sober. So November 1st, that evening, as the transition to November 1st, I declared myself recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind. And I ended my identification once and always an addict, and had identified the real, quote unquote, demon of my life, which was toxic shame. The idea that there was something wrong with me, that I was dirty, bad, shameful, or messed up. And if you knew me, you'd really not, you'd eventually find out that I'm that way at the core, and that I'm unlovable, and all that stuff that goes with that, wrapped with that. And I had, over the a number of years, worked to transform and bring that to wholeness. It wasn't a complete wholeness yet at that moment, but in taking that declaration for myself and listening to it with faith, I ended my identification with being an alcoholic and an addict. And a few weeks later, maybe 6 weeks later, a friend of mine came up from California who I'd been sober with for many years, had met him in a morning AA meeting in Yosemite, came up to see me, and he had ended his identification with Alcoholics Anonymous and had a vial of LSD with him. And we were about ready to sit down and watch The Brief History of Time. And he said, "Oh, hey, I almost forgot. I have this vial. Would anybody like a drop or two?" And I took 3, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, but I figured if one was good, 3's better.
Yeah, that's a good thing right out of the fellowship. One's good, three's better. Yeah.
Yeah. So so within a very short moment, like within the hour, I really, really, really wanted to go outside, and I donned my foul weather gear because it was December, and it was snowing. And when I opened that door, the world was so breathlessly bright. The snow had cleaned Coeur d'Alene streets by like just blanketing everything. It was damp, and the noise had been dampened. It was quiet, and I felt the snow crunch under my feet as I marched myself down to the lake shore, which is where I wanted to get to on Tubbs Hill. There's a hill there that's got a really beautiful nature area. It's really just straight down my road and onto the hill. I got out there and I was wandering around, and eventually I got to this spot on the lake shore, and I sat down. I just cleared a spot from my butt, sat down, and eventually I was like, well, just let's go a little bit more. And I scooped out some gravel and laid my body in it. And then eventually I started burying myself in the snow and the gravel a little bit in the snow. And I just buried myself. I was in Gore-Tex, insulating myself. And at some point I stopped that action and faded out into the universe.
All right.
My mind stilled. And in that stillness, I sensed my union with the universe. And when I was disturbed from that reverie, or non-reverie even, because it was a stillness, when I was disturbed from that by the bells ringing across the lake, I was like, what are those bells on that clock? It was obviously a clock, but when I heard that bell, I was like, what is that bell? And I sat up and I looked over, and I could see some buildings over there, but I had no idea what they really were. Over the course of the next couple of hours, I made my way around the lake shore to those buildings. And when I got to where the sound was coming from, I took a few moments of triangulation. When I got to where the sound was coming from, it happened to be the science building at North Idaho College. And in that moment, I decided I was going to go to school. I wanted to go to school. I was committed to going to school to study what had just happened to me. I wanted to know what had happened. Had other people experienced this?
That being the spiritual awakening associated perhaps with the ingestion of at least 3 drops out of the vial of this substance or the molecule known as lysergic acid diethylamide. Huh?
That is correct. And it was an exceptionally powerful experience. And I had it in the back of my mind that Bill Wilson, one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, had experienced LSD, and that he wrote about it in a book called As Bill Sees It, about how he thought it was necessary for alcoholics to have that kind of spiritual awakening to transform themselves from that seemingly hopeless state of mind. And I'd been on Grateful Dead tour, so I knew a little bit about LSD from Grateful Dead tour. People were taking it, getting out of their mind with it, with dancing and whatever they were doing. And I also had heard, some of the, if you take it, you go insane. I'd heard a lot of, a few of the memes. I'd known some of the music of the 60s and 70s was inspired by it. I really didn't know a lot about it. I really didn't know a lot about it. And I was like, if this molecule can produce that result in that short of a time that I just experienced, I really want to know what happened. And I want to share that with everybody I know and love.
All right. Well, that's fascinating indeed. And thanks for getting us to a really cool space 13 minutes into this conversation. I am very curious about a couple things that come to mind. There you are following the bells, and you get to the source of who's making that sound, who interrupted your fading into the universe, where was the disturbance emanating from? What were you to find once you chase down that ringing noise into the air, and you find yourself on the campus of the science building of North Idaho College, and take it from there, some sort of omen that it's time to go back to school. And I think I heard you say that not only go back to school, but to study the effects of what had just occurred for you, or what was this super powerful experience, life-changing, life-altering, maybe even life-defining experience. And, given that it was on the heels of you voluntarily ending your relationship with the basis of the 12-step alcoholic 12 traditions and 12-step model, there was a new opportunity to look at the source of a spiritual awakening that Bill Wilson had talked about. And so off you went to study, and not only to study, but to find a way to bring this incredible life-changing molecule to the people who matter to you, the people you love, the people that care about. I mean, this gave life a new level of worthiness, I suspect. And having dabbled a little bit with this myself, some of the names that come to mind, of course, immediately are the Electric Kool-Aid folks, are the, Burroughs and, and Kerouac, and then looking at Huxley, some of the people who've written about MDMA or written about DMT or written about other entheogens or perhaps even plant medicine allies and there. So I'm going to be very curious about your thoughts about the association between the laboratory-based allies of ketamine and LSD and maybe like ecstasy versus or along with the plant-based allies, of San Pedro and even ayahuasca or psilocybin or, for that matter, combo off the belly of the frog or all those things. Like, thanks for letting me summarize this. If I said anything that's either inaccurate or obtusely inappropriate, let me know. Otherwise, let's launch from here.
I'm going to segue right back to there in a very short amount of time. I was standing there at the doors of the science building, but they were locked. It was just before 7 a.m. And I turned around and I walked, and all-nighter. So I walked over to the admissions office because I was going to be in action. I was going to go to school, and I walked to the admissions office and I waited for it to open. And Connie, the lady, showed up. And I was in tears, and she was trying to make out what I was trying to say. And I'm like, I really want to go to school and study what just happened to me. I told her to straight up what I had just experienced. And she said, don't worry about it. We're going to get you in. Mm-hmm. And I studied and I studied and I studied. And eventually I went to a conference in Palenque, Mexico, Chiapas, at a resort called Chancay. The entheobotany seminars put on by Terrence McKenna, Jonathan Ott.
Oh my God. Oh my
Rob Symington,
all right.
Ken Symington, Rob Montgomery, Christian Ratch, Claudia Mueller, Eveline, Sasha Shulgin was there, Anne Shulgin was there. A bunch of other really great, extraordinary people were there who are making a difference with humanity right now, including Amanda Fielding of the Beckley Foundation. And in that moment, I found myself home. I found a home, a place that I definitely belonged. I was able to write a paper out of an observation of a bunch of people taking a phenethylamine compound, which is a structure like mescaline of, a psychotropic drug or a psychedelic or a entheogenic drug. And it's 2-CT7, which is 2,5-dimethoxy-4-propylthiophenolamine. And I watched a bunch of people take it, and I took it myself, and I had this ridiculously extraordinary experience. And I thought, this is a really great opportunity for a subjective bioassay, which is the idea of writing a survey relating to people's subjective experiences from their ingestion willingly of a chemical that they obviously chose to take. I was developing myself inside of medical anthropology. The concept of studying therapeutic efficacy and what that might actually mean. I was searching for declarations that people were listening with credibility or faith that would lead to or cause healing effect in them. At that point, I'd already done something called the Landmark Forum, which had introduced me to the concept of honoring myself as my word. And that led to me being able to write an extraordinary paper that was put into the MAPS Bulletin, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies Bulletin, Volume 10, Number 2. And that bulletin was my article that was noticed and witnessed by a old clandestine chemist named Darrell Lemaire. His wife, Jean Millay, had just gotten her new copy of the bulletin, and he saw it and said, I need to write this kid. So he writes me and says, hey, I've been doing this stuff a long time. You might want to talk to me. And I got a little bit paranoid about that. And I was like, whoa, I did not expect that fame. I did not expect that kind of thing, even though I put my address in the MAPS bulletin. He wrote me, and that kind of shocked me for a moment. But then he wrote again, and he said, hey, I'm trying to tell you something, trying to share something with you. I want to give you something. I want to give you a lab. And I said, you know what? I think I'll take that lab. And so I met him up with full moon of March of 2001, and I got my first lab. And so in that conversation, I'd already been steeped in Sasha Shulgin's conversation, natural versus synthetic, which is where we were going with that plant medicine versus laboratory medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's quite interesting. There could be synergism of the different constituents of a plant medicine that work with our body as well, that could possibly be holistic. We've never actually isolated the compounds, recombined them to test them in that scientific, evidence-based, fresh observation fashion. We have not done that yet, so we really can't tell the distinction between a plant medicine and the entourage effect of plant medicines having, small components of different things. A combo might have, 5-MeO and bufotenine in it and some other trace compounds, and other plants will have things like that. If you isolate the pure compound by extraction methodologies, purification extraction, and you synthesize the pure compound by synthetic methods, and you purify them and you recrystallize them, they're identical. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to separate them at all. So the natural versus synthetic discussion disappears. Are some of the plant medicines maybe greater allies? There is a conversation for considering the softness of an organic process, even though chemical solvents and all that stuff is still organic. It's still being done by nature, because I am nature as a chemist. I think in my experience, there is a case for the softness, the mother earthliness, the groundingness of animal or plant-derived sacraments.
Interesting.
And then there's the ecological issue, which is one of the urgencies that woke me up, which is that we have to take care of Mother Earth and all her relations. And, milking toads might be abuse. It might be another form of slavery. Non-sustainable practices of harvesting psychotropic plants from around the world, or psychotropic animals. If it's not sustainably done, then it's destructive. And I'm trying to be constructive and creative. I am committed to being constructive and creative. And that concept of just raping and pillage Mother Earth further beyond absolute mere necessity is what I'm trying to get away from. I'm trying to actually go towards stewardship.
Understood. I appreciate that completely. And stewardship of, our natural sovereignty and who we are as citizens and renting cohabitants of this thing called Mother Earth. One of the things I want to point to, because I think our listeners might be savvy enough to at least raise an eyebrow with something you said just moments ago about the softness of the organic process that plant allies may have, that perhaps our synthetic associates or equivalents, bioequivalents at least, and maybe indeed, it's hard for me to wrap myself totally around the full identical process that you described there. It's not where I want to go exactly, but I just want to take a peek at that, because I know, for instance, if you do milk the toad, if you do milk the green toad of the combo toad, and milk it from the same toad up in North America rather than in the rainforest, you don't get the same process, even though it is indeed the same chemical. That you simply can't do that. You can't harvest the frogs in New York City and then make that happen. So that's kind of really fascinating, that there's other features in the chemical that play into its entheogenic power and efficaciousness. No, am I right? First of all, do you agree with this? I'm lying.
There's two things, or maybe even three in there. First off, entheogenic is a word coined by Carl Ruck, John Ott, Blaise Staples in 1979, and I think Wasson was involved. R. Gordon Wasson was involved, and the word entheogen was to replace the pejorative of psychedelic, which had become a no-no in American society for quite some time. Entheogen simply means that which has you realize the divine within, and its root is enthusiasm. If you go back and look at it, entheos. And so that's the first thing. The second thing in there was the concept of New York versus the Amazon. Well, one of the things is the light cycle is different in New York than in the Amazon. Environmental factors are different. Temperature, humidity, the chemistry of the diet is going to be different. All those different factors will lead to different productions of different chemicals. Plus, there'll be the stress hormones of that organism having been taken out of its natural environment.
True.
And all of that can contribute to a difference in the felt, perceived, subjective experience of the experient.
Okay.
I would want to consider all those factors as well. There's a lot of factors.
Okay.
People are milking toads in America, frogs, toads, animals that they can bring to the United States of America and farm and harvest. They are actually doing that and creating great effect. Is it the same? I'm not sure. Then there's also now that we're on to mindset and setting, there's also the set and setting of a New York apartment versus the set and setting of a Paloka in the Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
A hut in the Amazon, or even laying in a field in the Amazon, experiencing that is probably going to be a lot different than hanging out in an apartment in New York.
Sure.
I have drinking Amazon beverages, ayahuasca, both in city settings, rural settings, and in the Amazon. I have had different experiences. Now,
Interesting.
How much did I contribute to that, and just my expectations given on the environment I was in, and my evolution, my mindset, as I had transformed myself through each and every experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's why that at least points to the possibility, in my way of thinking anyways, about this thing that looks like, if transferred, almost like a bioidentical transfer, or some sort of, I guess it wouldn't quite be 3D printer transfer, but an actual identical chemical is then created synthetically that no longer seemingly meets the baseline criteria of having grown directly from Mother Earth. I do wonder about that identical nature given the other factors inside the decisive context. That said, let's go back to something, because now you brought me even closer to this question, which is, you mentioned drinking the teas of ayahuasca in different settings, whether it be in a rural setting, in the country setting, or even in the Amazon. And the softness you declared of the organic process. Now, for me, it's not clear that ayahuasca is a soft process at all. And it's not clear that kambo is a soft process. And it's not clear that any of the natural purgatives are soft processes. On the other hand, ketamine, lysergic acid diethylamide, ecstasy, synthetic ecstasy, MDMA, and even synthetic DMT, some of those, when compounded properly, have an extraordinarily comfortable in-ramp and out-ramp that is seemingly way softer than what Mother Aya has to say about it when I drink ayahuasca tea.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, especially when you qualified the end of that, when I drank ayahuasca tea. Remember that set and setting thing, what you bring to the experience. One of the phrases that came out of my 2CD7 subjective bioassay questionnaire was from a really interesting person that runs the Matrix Masters podcast, Lorenzo Haggerty. He said, "Minimal haunting by my usual demons." And so we bring our demons along, the linguistic demons, often words we've said to ourselves, experiences, and what we've made up out of them. And we bring those along to the experience. And so I have had incredibly hard ayahuasca experiences.
Hell yes.
And I still sense her, I was almost going to personify the plant.
No, it's a herb. It's a herb, dude. You go right ahead and you can...
Well, it's like
she's real.
She as an organism, she's real, and as I don't want to anthropomorphize her.
I understand.
I don't want to. It's like it's our language. We're trapped in our our Aristotelian essences on this one.
Mm-hmm.
The experience of it being in communication with the molecules as they cascade scintillatingly through my body I've had really hard experiences. And I've had ridiculously soft experiences, even after amazingly traumatic events.
Mm-hmm.
And I have 100% faith, 108% faith that is related to my language in my own head.
I got it. Okay. So, again, going back to a little bit of what the enterprise likes to circulate around this idea of a context being decisive, we start
Which
really look
enterprise?
this would be the landmark education, landmark worldwide enterprise. This with Werner's very core statement that the context is decisive.
Absolutely.
When we really get that, we bring our context to all of our experiences and then behave, act, and speak towards our experiences based on the context that we designed, that we have created to allow that experience to occur within. There is something to what you're saying that, I bring my own demons, I bring my own stories, I bring my own significances, I bring my own questions, concerns, fears, anxieties, depressions, hopelessnesses. Okay. I bring all of that forward in each of my experiences on any given moment, including right now. So let's launch from here, Casey. So here it is. We have you as a psychonaut apprentice in 2000. I'm not sure if we're talking about 2001 or 2003. I'm not sure. I'm trying to get the dates right.
February of 2000 was the Planck entheobotany seminar where I had the opportunity
Okay.
to observe what would become the article that would be read, that would get me my first lab,
Okay.
that would lead me to my apprenticeship.
All right. So here we are 20 plus years ago. And, let's see if we can synopsize. Who have you now become as a steward? Who have you now become as a spokesperson? Who have you now become as a deliverer of the expanded consciousness that's available with the proper ingestion or relationship creation with these entheogens?
I was very intentional in setting up that lab and creating those molecules. And I was at play in the fields of the Lords, and I was doing that for quite some time. And I'd made my way all the way to London, England, where I had gone to the Ibogaine conference, the first one put on by what would become my partner, Hattie Wells. I would eventually get arrested for making LSD, 2CB, and DMT in England. And I had seen a pamphlet at that entheobotany seminar on cognitive liberty, the Center for Cognitive Liberty and Ethics. At that time, they were called the Alchemind Society. Richard Glenn Boyer had created this concept, had actually finally concretized freedom of thought, academic and religious freedom, in the study of the mind into a legal concept. As a Juris Doctor, he created cognitive liberty and rooted it under the First Amendment. If we cannot experience something that will give rise to the thought that might give rise to a petition for a redress of grievances, then we're literally restricting freedom of speech and freedom of thought with it. And so I had heard that concept and understood that. And I knew that there was no way I was going to let this great opportunity of being arrested for psychedelic manufacture go to waste. I was going to make a difference with it. And so I committed right there and then to wage what I would call a cognitive liberty defense, or an entheogen defense, not based in religion, not based in my drink is special and you should respect me, judge, but in a fundamental tenet of what it means to be truly free. I said, you can't make me guilty by statute for actions that are intrinsically innocent. And I felt very innocent in my experiences with LSD and other psychedelics, and very innocent, shamelessly, in the Garden of Eden with the manufacture of them and the Johnny Appleseeding spreading of them. And so I took that concept. I did not have the requisite state of mind, the mens rea necessary to convict me, because I did not have guilty mind, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, thoughts are free and subject to no rule, as Paracelsus had said. And John Stuart Mill said that we should be able to do whatever we want, provided we don't harm others. So combining those principles together with the concept of equal protection and equal treatment, I should be protected just as much as tobacco and alcohol people are protected by good manufacturing practices, safe places of consumption and supply, effective labeling, taxation to handle the emergency services so that we can pay for anything we do to the public weal that might need paying for, and that I should also have equal treatment with alcohol and tobacco users if they have the right to alter their mental functioning with alcohol and tobacco. I didn't see why I didn't have the right to alter my mental functioning with the drugs of my choice. And that, in essence, became the foundation of my defense. I am fundamentally committed to the idea that we have the right to alter our own mental functioning just as much as a woman has the right to alter her reproductive functioning through the exogenous use or endogenous use of contraceptives. Why I can't see why I can't use LSD as a contraceptive for my mind. And that is the fundamental basis in which I am still speaking about drug law and drug policy. It is still a matter of equal protection and equal treatment. Really underlying all of it, like I said, with the medical anthropology, is a drive, a commitment, a tropism to wholeness. I studied holotropic breath work, Grof transpersonal training. Stanislav Grof, he created the transpersonal psychology.
You're probably a pretty big fan of Dr. Groff. Then he's all over this. He's all over your game, isn't he?
Yeah, he's really totally on my game. And he and that movement towards wholeness. There was 3 threads that I had brought together, which is all back to faith and declarations. And the medical anthropology text, I read this line which said, "Therapeutic efficacy boils down to a declaration made by a sufferer or a healer that is listened with credibility or faith." And the sufferer can be the healer. There's a chapter actually in the big book, I believe, is "Physician, Heal Yourself," or actually that's probably in the Bible too. But that concept that we can transform our context through faith in what we're saying to ourselves and what we're saying to each other, through listening ourselves with integrity, we have a chance to transform ourselves. And that's something that Werner Erhard definitely brought to the table when he talks about context creates the future we're living into.
Exactly.
Our word creates our world. And I learned it. So before I ever made LSD, I had actually completed the Landmark Forum and indeed the Landmark Curriculum for Living. And I had trained for 2.5 years in the leadership body of Landmark because I was so committed to the transformations that I saw there. I saw people let go of baggage that they had been carrying for their entire lives and grow taller, stand prouder, stand freer, breathe easier, and just create incredible futures for themselves in the Landmark Forum and the advanced course and what they call the self-expression leadership program. Then I got involved in what was at that time called the Introduction to the Forum Leaders program because I was committed and still am committed to being a forum leader.
Oh, you're still committed to that.
I am still committed to being a forum leader, and twice my penchant for selling cannabis has gotten in the way. The first time the center manager figured out I was selling cannabis, he's like, he asked my partner, he's like, "Why were you late?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, Casey was picking up some weed." She told the truth. Can't blame her for that, especially inside of that context of that program. He called me into the center office, and I was a coach of the coaches in the ILP at the time. He asked me, "Was that true?" And I said, "Yes." He's like, "Well, you're gonna have to choose selling cannabis or the ILP." I'm like, "Well, it was ILP. It had transitioned to the ILP at that time. It was 2000." And I said, "Well, I'm pretty involved in the weed game. I think I'm going to end the war on some people who use some drugs, and then I'll be back." And then 2018, I got back, had not ended the war yet. I'm still working on that part. I'm still committed to that part as well. In 2018, I got back to Landmark after a long hiatus.
Yeah.
Prison had gotten in the way. But even in there, I was able to use what I, all those distinctions and listen to people and help cause transformation inside prison. But after I got back involved in Landmark and I had taken on some obligations in my life, and one of them was a commitment to finish a transaction for some cannabis to pay for some things that had happened. And I sold it to an undercover agent in the state of Wyoming. And at that moment, I then had the same problem with the leadership body that I'd had the first time. And whilst cannabis is legal in many states, it certainly wasn't in Wyoming.
Yeah, you're looking at another jail or prison run then at that point, or what?
Well, I did 143 days as they pulled me in. I represented myself again. My arguments are now in the Supreme Court of the state of Wyoming. The arguments are pretty simple. All laws of a general nature shall be uniform. All general laws shall be uniform in nature. And if you exclude alcohol and tobacco, they stop being uniform. And this, by severing the natural class substances with a potential for abuse, as it's written in the law, with an explicit sentence that says, don't apply this to alcohol and tobacco, you're creating an arbitrary carve out for the politicians' friends, those people that were the legislators at the time that wrote that bill. They're creating an arbitrary carve out that, their friends could have been addicted to cocaine and heroin.
Mm-hmm.
But it's based on historical and cultural tradition that alcohol and tobacco were, things that we've taxed for a long time in the United States of America and tolerated. And now we're expanding that in the United States with regards to cannabis in particular, and psychedelics are on the horizon. You're seeing that transformation. We are seeing that transformation happening. And there's another rule in the Wyoming Constitution which says absolute arbitrary power over the lives, liberty, and freedom exists nowhere in a republic, not even in the largest majority. Then you have the concept of majoritarian abuse of power, in which the majority in the parliament, in the legislature of the state of Wyoming, decided that they would carve that little get out clause for their friends and themselves, probably, for the manufacture, production, otherwise the commerce of cannabis. And those two rules in the state of Wyoming violate the Constitution. Those two concepts inside of the law, the Controlled Substances Act of the state of Wyoming, violates the Wyoming's Constitution. And it also violates equal protection and due process clauses and the privileges and immunity clauses of the United States Constitution and the 14th Amendment as held against the states. And so this argument applies equally in the federal jurisdiction. And I am on my way. And if it doesn't go in my favor, I wind up doing 222 more days. And after doing 3,393 in England for manufacturing LSD, I could probably do that standing on my head and have a great time.
3,000 days in England. Yeah.
3,393. And in that time, as a result of creating the Cognitive Liberty Defense, I became a folk hero around the world, such that I am now listened with credibility and faith about, what's coming out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it matters what you say.
It totally matters what I say. Everything matters in that context in particular. And so I'm committed to actually bringing this conversation of transformation. What Werner started with this upgrade of human being as a speaking being will certainly continue as long as I can speak about it. I am so committed to the work of Landmark Education and what they're Landmark worldwide now.
Worldwide. Mm-hmm.
And what they're up to. They're, operating from the fundamental values of the opportunity to make a difference, self-expression, creating from nothing, responsibility, the willingness to be cause in the matter of one's own life, no longer blaming your parents. You are now cause. Mm-hmm. And integrity, honoring one's word as oneself, a context, that is the context, the ultimate orientation, the ultimate context from which one can choose to live, that I am my word and nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I totally got that. And I'm immersed in much of the same things that you are, at least enough to be conversational. So going all the way back to the 12-step program, and then, my run through Landmark Education, then turned Landmark Worldwide, my interrelationships with Werner himself, and then with the distinctions that come through the curriculum for living, as well as the Introduction Leaders program and the introduction to the Landmark Forum, and even seminar leader, and fast tracking to forum leader, and consideration for wisdom, and all of that stuff, and not to mention our shared interest in, we'll call it psychonautics, if we will. And there's something about all of this that has me, and I'm sure our listeners, curious as to what 2021, where that finds you. It almost seems like it's a little bit of a nuisance and a little bit of a hassle, and a little bit of more than a little bit of a necessity for you to take on the legal resistance, or the legal system's resistance to the growth and development of who we get to be as we consider expanding consciousness using plant-based or using Mother Earth's own organic contributions, and then standing for our right to do so against a Department of Justice that is at least bent sideways to block that this is a lot of your energy has been spent sort of pushing back on that wall, when you have a higher message that you're really driven to deliver, like being committed to something greater than yourself might be in the world of creating an expansion of consciousness availability for all humankind. Where does 2021 find Casey Hardison at this point?
Physically, I'm directly over the center of the earth in the Idaho territories, in the Tetons, on the North American continent, on the third rock from the sun. And I have the heart of the sun. blazing within me with praise, gratitude, and love for all humans and all humanity and all plants and all animals and all things and all beings, anywhere and everywhere. And with that kind of blazing fire in me, to spend a lot of my time focused on the war on some people who use some drugs has been an extraordinary opportunity for growth and development and training of myself inside of the legal paradigms of the Western nations and even of the United Nations. I want to take that to the next level. I understand the legislative process. I understand the judicial process. And I am ready to take on leadership of the executive process.
I actually caught wind of that. I did a little research. I'm glad that you brought that up because I was looking for when and how I could get some inroads into that. And entertaining to say the least, but there's something about as soon as one gets over their entertainment about what we're about to talk about, one sees not only a commitment, but a commitment, a dedication, then beyond that, a declaration for a creative future that then has you living into this notion of being the head of the executive department. And so talk to us a little bit about what leadership of the executive department really, I think you're speaking directly to the United States government. Are you willing to share that during this interview? What does that mean to you?
Absolutely, I'm willing to share that. My father and I canoed from Idaho to New Orleans in 1984. Wearing buckskins that my father had stitched, one stitch at a time, buckskin leathers, in a handmade cedar canoe built by the Huron Indians, Great Canadian Canoe, with flintlock rifles, from Post Falls, Idaho, all the way to New Orleans. Now, people are going to say, well, there's a continental divide. I'm like, yeah, it's hard paddling upriver. But I learned what it took to live off the land. I learned how to survive. I learned how to be, I actually had my faith in humanity restored on that trip when our rifles got stolen in West Memphis, Arkansas, and the police actually returned them within 72 hours, having found them in the pawn shop. And the church and the community came out, really helped us. The AA community came out. We went to AA meetings all along the canoe trip. And it was in that process that I'd finally learned what had actually happened to my father. He had been abused as a boy, as a ranch hand, sexually abused, and became an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic as well. And, he'd struggled. My grandfather had struggled with having meetings in the mountains of Montana. And then my father got in trouble, and he got an opportunity to choose Leavenworth for 10 years or active duty in Korea. And he committed at that moment to that oath of a member of the 101st Airborne to uphold and defend the Constitution from all threats, foreign and domestic. And that permeated my life. And I saw that finally on the canoe trip. And we talked a lot about that. And we talked about the founding of the country. And we talked about the fact that I'm a 8th generation descendant of a signer of the Declaration of Independence, that up one limb is the captain of the Virginia militia, and it just goes into the founding of America and what would become the United States of America. I resonated to that. And so when I got to that constitutional process of being, accused of manufacturing controlled substances, of course I was going to use a constitutional argument like cognitive liberty and develop myself as a constitutional theorist. I studied law for 7 years on the bed in my prison cells, maybe even a little bit more. I definitely did mess around for a few of those years where I just wasn't really studying. I was just giving myself a break. But I developed myself as a constitutional scholar. And I still consider myself that today. My new case has definitely sharpened that. And so the legal process of the war on some people who use some drugs has actually created a boon to me. And what does it mean for me to throw my hat over the fence as a candidate for the President of the United States of America? It's an extraordinary opportunity to lead and create an authored conversation about what's possible for human beings when we clear away some basic and very simple conversations about our biosurvival, about our anal emotional territorialism, and we start using our neurosemantics, our intelligence, to intensify and amplify wisdom, such that we start having compassion and caring for everybody on planet Earth, not just Americans, and that we realize the bliss of caring for each other. And that vision with the network of people in my, what could be called my originating circle, the network of people that have really made a difference in my life, we can cause transformation in humanity that will be a permanent change, a permanent shift. And I do not mean like more, better, different. I mean like breakthrough ways of being in government, completely and utterly responsible, completely and utterly honoring its word to the people.
Mm-hmm.
If, when, and as the day comes, I will want people that are extensively trained in leadership in every single one of those executive roles that I get to appoint. I would love to see an entire cabinet of people that have experienced the curriculum for living.
Interesting.
And beyond.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I really appreciate that and have shared that at various times in the past. I think right now I'm in a lukewarm area of that wish, or really that desire. There's a time where, and maybe now is that time, as I create an upcoming summit, which I think you're likely to be a part of that you don't even know of yet. And that is the Mental Wealth Summit on the weekend of October 10th this year, where we're really looking at non-conventional, or almost by definition, it has to be non-conventional approaches to this whole notion of what mental illness is and what the treatment protocols are, and what part of the conversation that can be altered, upended, disappeared simply by transforming the narrative. Now, that's a whole different sideline of what is here. Along lines of what is here is the inspiration that you are in taking on the transformation of not only this country, but this country as sort of the eye of a needle for which the world comes through, so that you can bring integrity and authenticity and cause in the matter of one's life, as well as commitment to growth and development and to something greater than ourselves to the world, such that, some pieces of the mess, of the pretty extensive mess that we're now living, eating, and breathing, can be alleviated or diminished, or perhaps not in more, better, different, or less, worse, none of that, not more of the same, but really breakthroughs and transformations. And for you to be such a staunch steward, like a declarative steward of that, I wonder if you're aware of the inspiration that you're having on the public around you by just carrying through with that.
I am aware, and I'm really grateful for that cyclical process. It's all my life's a circle, sunrise to sundown. As Harry Chapin said at one point, yes, I'm very aware that I am having an inspirational effect on people, and I come from a world where inspiration moves me brightly, and I want others brightly inspired to cause and create new possibilities for themselves that far exceeds their wildest dreams.
Yeah, exactly.
And I want to go back to what you were saying about mental wellness. I think as we shift the conversation of humanity from the context of psychology to the context of beingness, which is known as ontology, and we discuss epistemology, how we actually come to know things, I think that we will see a massive transformation in the way we be and the way we think, plan, act, feel, behave around what we consider at the moment mental illness.
Right.
I think that will be a massive shift. As far as epistemology, I've got a really nice shorthand for it, which is God said it, someone working for God said it, good enough for you, good enough for me. Observer objective, which is the ideal of science, and then observer subjective, which is the direct experience. And when I looked at the epistemology text of my youth, it only had the first four, and it left direct experience as a way of knowing completely out of it, which seemed really inappropriate for a book on teaching epistemology. But as we shift that conversation, it's really going to make a difference. If we, because what we're really we show up in beingness. We're actions. Being is an action word. We are not static Aristotelian essences. She is that way. He is that way. Well, she might have appeared to you that way on that moment, but that's maybe not the way she appeared to someone else. And there might be other ways of seeing and experiencing that person or that organism or whatever you're looking at. But when we live inside of the is, am, are, were, was, be, being, been of English, it's a spook, a semantic spook left over from our Aristotelian origins in philosophic thought. And as we switch to ontological thought, ontological thinking, we move out of the context of static Aristotelian essences and move into the realm of possibility, much like it's kind of possible to find this particle over here in this region. This is a probability cloud that we've created about quantum mechanics. When you look at that, it's probabilities of being found here. Well, there is a probability that that person appeared to you as that way on that day, and that's totally acceptable. That's how they appeared to you. What are you going to make that mean? Who are you going to be about that?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where I'm going to on promoting mental wellness, is that we take radical responsibility for the things that we say and think to ourselves, and the things that we say and think to each other. And rather than creating limiting realities where we're absolutely certain they are that way, is, am, or were, was, being, been, we actually adopt what was apparently necessary to solve the quantum catastrophe of science in the earliest part of the last century, in which they couldn't understand whether a photon was a particle or a wave, and then they just realized it was the way they were looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
If you looked at it one way, it looked like a particle. If you looked at it the other way, it looked like a wave. And so it wasn't a duality as much as a unified whole that was being looked at in different directions, different
Mm-hmm.
perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And when people took responsibility for that in their language, they created a language system called E prime and general semantics. And when they created that language system, they solved many of the intractable problems of the experimental evidence that they were seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And that psychology has not caught up with the general population. Ontology is one way to begin to bring that in there,
Mm-hmm.
and epistemology as well, the study of the ways we know.
Mm-hmm.
When we take responsibility for those semantic spooks in our language, is, am, are, were, was, be, being, been, they're like the equal sign in mathematics. X equals Y, she equals this, he equals that.
Right.
When we take that out and we're like, they appear that way to me, that's putting responsibility in. And there's integrity in that sentence, because that's how I'm experiencing it, and it's appearing for me. But that may not actually be exactly the way it is.
Isn't that interesting? So I'm gonna, in the sake of time, and really to tie back, and I could keep talking to you, and I invite you to come back to my other podcast that I'll speak with you about it again. The Insanity podcast. That's actually two words, called Insanity, 2 words, and that's I host that with my good friend Sam Morris, and the three of us will have a rock and roll time. But one of the things I want to talk about, which is, it goes back to what I was saying about bioidentical too. I think I would have liked it or felt slightly more satisfied, rather than you saying that there is nothing at all different about a synthetic based entheogen that is created directly and totally from the basis of a plant-based ally. There, if you might add, at least to my perspective, rather than just declaring it as being so, given what we've talked about the importance of the injection of context into how things occur for us, and the notion that a particle is a wave and a wave is a particle, depending on the perspective that you take, even though that's not really possible in Aristotelian binary linear thinking. It's like, well, that isn't the way we're thinking. The way that we're thinking now, or what you're talking about with epistemology and ontology, is a new way of being that can drive forth a whole new humanity moving forward. And isn't today really the urgent day to make that happen?
Absolutely. And that's the urgency. That's the exact thing that I woke up to, that urgency that first time on LSD. That, the identical conversation comes down to this. If you have something that you spectrographically identify as, and you get you use light to tell you what molecule you have, and you have isolated one from a plant source, and you've synthesized one from another source, and you've purified them to the same level, and you get a spectrographic reading, people might want to come in there with that homeopathic concept and think, oh, but the imprint's there. Mm-hmm. That's a possibility. I'm not going to rule it out. Mm-hmm. And according to the best methods of modern science, they're identical. And if I take LSD,
I can accept that with that caveat, instantly, as soon as you say that, it's according to. Yes. It opens up the possibility of new expanses that could, in fact, prove a particle being a wave. And that's all that really opens up that possibility.
Exactly. And so it's like, if I take LSD in New York versus Africa, which I've done. If I take LSD,
Africa, shit.
totally great. Bushman
Holy
Kalahari.
shit,
It was
man.
absolutely amazing. But I'll tell you another story later. So many stories that do not limit what's possible. LSD, taken in California or taken in Africa as a pure compound, is going to be identical on the body as far as what it brings to the body. Now, what the mind brings to the experience,
There's difference there for sure.
Yep.
All right. Well, Casey, what a cool conversation. Thank you for having it. Thank you for touching on three of my favorite things, which is indeed my relationship with 12 Steps, my relationship with Landmark, my relationship with entheogens, and my relationship with mental wealth, with the government, I even share being arrested for a whole nother conversation. I've been arrested before, and for really silly shit that I ended up being, making a difference on the back end of. So I even share that. I didn't spend 3,000 days. I spent actually 1 day. So 3,392 less days than
93.
You. Yeah, less days than you. Because
Yeah.
I spent 33.
They're all the same now.
Yeah, they're all the same. They're all the same now. How can people find you, Casey? Where should they find you? What can they do to follow or read about you?
You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. I will be building a website for my presidential campaign. I had my first presidential ramble. I will be creating a YouTube channel, video outlet channel, every Tuesday at 4:19, Tuesday afternoons at 4:19 p.m. Pacific time, I believe. I will be putting that out, although there is someone in my who wants to argue for 4:19 Mountain Time. And the reason for 4:19 is the 4:20 folks, you can say, hey, it's 4:19, you got a minute? And then 4:19 also harkens back to Bicycle Day, which is the day that Albert Hoffman intentionally dosed himself after having accidentally dosed himself, maybe, intentionally dosed himself with LSD for the first time in Basel, Switzerland in 1943. And so 4:19, 1943 is an important day in history because it transformed humanity, and that change is rolling. And part of that change is the discovery of conversations about our beingness. That's one of the things I'm going to be discussing. It'll be more geared towards the political conversations. Those are the places to find me.
Cool enough.
At this point in time, I don't really have a desire for masses of people trying to contact me for personal communication.
Right.
It can be very overwhelming.
For sure. I totally got that, and I appreciate that, and I think our listeners will as well. Yeah. You never know who shows up, and which new minds show up that have something to add or offer. I mean, let's look at our conversation here. Who knows what this is about to launch. So
yeah,
it's been a deep
exactly.
pleasure. What's that?
It's been I was going to say, I'm occasionally found on Clubhouse. It has been a very deep pleasure.
Thank you.
These are the things I really want to talk about. I love talking about the drug conversation because it's really important transformation of humanity there. We can add one of the biggest injustices ever. And what I really want to talk about is transformation of humanity by shifting the context to ontology and epistemology.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
Casey, thank you so much. How about that, guys? It was really something. Thanks for being here the whole ride with Casey Hardison and I. I think we took on some important topics. And if this unearths some topics for you, if there's something that, you're kind of getting freed up a little bit, maybe there's something you want to do differently than you've been doing, that's fine. Or do it altered, or do it transformed, or take on, or read about, or catch on to, or go just say, I love you to your children or your parents or your friend or yourself. Because really, in the end, this is all a human experience. Every piece of this is just simply a gorgeous human experience, including the stuff that is completely intolerable. All of that represents humanity, and that's the name of this podcast, and that's why I'm here. I get to talk to wonderful people like Casey Hardison. Today's another day to have that type of conversation. Thank you again, Casey. It really has been an honor and a pleasure, and we'll catch you on the flip ride.
It has been lovely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye, everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode of Welcome to Humanity.
Hey, welcome to Humanity family. It's Ryan Levesque here, co-producer of the show. I truly hope you enjoyed Dr. Fred's in-depth conversation today. If you did, and if the conversations we share each week are making a difference for you, could you please take just a moment to leave a rating and a short review on Apple Podcasts? Your enthusiastic review helps new listeners discover the show. Your support here really does make a difference. I'd also like to invite you to reach out to a friend or two who would appreciate today's episode. Maybe shoot them a quick text or email, or maybe pick up the phone and invite them to subscribe to the Welcome to Humanity podcast so they can be enriched from the discovery of amazing ideas and insights each week. As always, you can find past episodes along with the complete show notes and links at welcometohumanity.net/podcast. If you'd like to explore how working one-on-one with Dr. Fred can help you break through whatever challenges you might be facing with your mental health or well-being, leading to new levels of freedom and vitality, I invite you to reach out to us directly by emailing Dr. Fred at welcometohumanity.net. That's DRFRED at welcometohumanity.net. Thanks so much for listening, and keep an ear out for another captivating conversation next week. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful week, and indeed, a beautiful life. Welcome to humanity.